Hello, I'm David Hepworth. Thanks for clicking this word in your ear, the latest of hundreds of chats Mark Allen and I have had over recent years, some between ourselves and others with musicians, authors, comedians, and other people we like. If you'd like to help make sure they continue, you might consider being a Patreon supporter by visiting patreon.com/wordinyour-ear, or just by liking or subscribing in whatever way you prefer. On with the show.
Welcome to another edition of Word in Your Ear and a book called Down on the Corner, which is a reference, of course, to the Creedence Clearwater song about the fictional jug band playing kazoos and gut bass and washboards. Right. And there's something very romantic about the whole notion of busking. Louis Armstrong, Irving Berlin, Lucinda Williams, Billy Bragg all got their starts as street players. And Carrie Baker has just written a riveting account of the story, subtitled Adventures in Busking and Street Music, and joins us from California. Carrie, very nice to see you.
Very nice to be here. This is the first interview I've done for this book.
Excellent. Well, it's a terrific book. We enjoyed it enormously. Now, your kind of involvement with busking, your kind of your conversion, if you like, happens, there's a very good description of it, in I think 1970 or whatever, when you're about 14 in Maxwell Street in Chicago. So tell us what happened there.
I was maybe 15 years old, actually. My father was the son of European immigrants, Jewish European immigrants who had come to Chicago by way of New York, by way of Russia. And my father told me he was taking me to a place called Maxwell Street in Chicago. And I said, okay, whatever. And he wanted to show this to me because that's where the Eastern European immigrants who landed in Chicago would congregate and sell and buy and trade and see one another. It was kind of a social event on Sunday mornings. And in the years that had gone by since the 1940s, or during maybe the 40s into the late 40s, 50s, 60s, the neighborhood had converted and become very black. And in the 50s, so my father had stopped going, and he didn't know to tell me this. It had become an outpost for artists like Muddy Waters and Chuck Berry, Billy Boy Arnold, Big Walter Horton, many other blues greats began to play Maxwell Street Market. So little did he know that, but we parked our car at the university parking lot nearby, started walking, and I started to hear slide guitar. And I was into music. I was into blues, but I had no idea that there was this street music scene on Maxwell Street. So we keep walking, and we follow the music, and there's this slide guitar and this blind guy with a not even a tin cup, a paper cup, safety pin to his lapel. And I had read about this guy. His name was Arvella Gray, blind Arvella Gray. He had his eyes severed, shot out in a gun battle over a woman in Peoria, Illinois, about 200 miles from Chicago. And there he was every Sunday on Maxwell Street, pretty much playing one song the whole time, John Henry.
And missing 3 fingers, was it, on his left hand?
And he was missing a few fingers, exactly.
His fretting hand, incredible.
So, I hung around and I'm a teenager here, and I got his phone number. My father happened to have a pen on him, and we got his phone number. I called him up and I started talking to him, and I thought, this would make a really good story for this new publication called the Chicago Reader, which was one of the first of the alternative weeklies in the tradition of, say, the Village Voice. It had just begun, and one day I happened to find a copy of this newspaper and thought, this is pretty new. Maybe I could get my foot in the door here. I'm, again, 15, 16 years old by then. I wrote an article. I did an interview with him. I was features editor of my daily, I think monthly high school newspaper. But I had taken a journalism class, so I knew a little about journalism. And I published a blues fanzine. Anyway, I talked to him, and I kept going to Maxwell Street every chance I had, with or without my father, sometimes with friends. We started to see other artists down there. Turns out he had a sister. He didn't even tell me about her, named Granny. Granny was there playing, and I interviewed her for Living Blues magazine. There was a guy named Little Pat Rushing who wailed on his electric guitar in a vacant lot surrounded by junk cars. There was a gospel duo of Blind Jim Brewer and Carrie Robinson, who just, could absolutely convert an atheist to religion with all the energy and passion emanating from their perch, a few blocks down. So Maxwell Street became a favorite place of mine, and it was probably years before I saw my next busker. But I traveled to New Orleans and certainly saw what there was on Royal Street and in Jackson Square. I would go to, in my later years, I would go to South by Southwest, and of course there were buskers in and around, the music conference, Mary Lou Lord. I mean, I'm jumping now to the indie rock era. But by then people like Lucinda Williams would play there, and Boy Dog Pondering, New Orleans.
Can I stop you just for a second? Because you trace the origins of busking right back to ancient Rome, don't you? It was a kind of these people were transporting the news, really, weren't they? A lot of the buskers, they were telling people what was actually going on.
They were indeed, and I did a lot of research when writing this book about the origins of busking, and of course, it goes back to ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Here in America, it goes back to Benjamin Franklin, a statesman, inventor, orator. And he would definitely busk and herald the news, as did some of these more ancient buskers. There's a book that came out in 1981 that really goes into detail about the origins of busking and buskers being tribunals as well as musicians or actors. I sort of summarized that because I wanted to jump ahead to the 20th and 21st centuries. But indeed, they were carriers of news before there were news alerts on your iPhone.
Was there also, interesting, going back to your first chap that you talked about seeing on the corner and so forth, was there all a traditional connection between busking and kind of disability? People who are blind, or was it to what extent was it a form of begging?
Well, indeed, there were a lot of blind street singers. Blind Lemon Jefferson, Reverend Gary Davis, Reverend, I don't know if he was a Reverend, but Smiley, he was a Reverend. What am I thinking of?
Blind Billy McTell played on the street in Atlanta.
Blind Billy McTell, etc. Certainly, disability was a thing. Not all buskers were.
No. But presumably it was a way you could make a living if you were blind. I mean, you're very limited in the ways you can make a living.
That is true. And, needless to say, these people weren't invited to play concert showcases. So busking is how they got out there. And some of them stayed buskers. Some of them were, in terms of blues, some of them were, like Reverend Gary Davis, were rediscovered later in life and got to play the festival circuit throughout America and throughout Europe. But indeed, there were disabled buskers. I keep thinking, and I'll probably end up saying this once or twice more, but there's definitely a volume 2 that I can write, and that would be certainly one inquiry to find others, of that ilk. But yes, Blind Lemon Jefferson played the Deep Ellum district of Dallas. And Reverend Gary Davis used to play out in front of tobacco factories in Durham, North Carolina, and later on in Harlem, New York.
Going back to your man who he played one song, what do buskers know about repertoire and the importance of? Do they tend to just do quite a narrow? They work out what the crowd want to hear and they deliver it again and again, or are they different from that?
I think all are different from one another. The one, as you mentioned, the one that I happened to see, Blind Arvella Gray, played John Henry, which is a traditional folk song, but he spiced it up but with local references to local streets. Got the shirt off of Halstead, which is a street in Chicago. Got the shoes off of Maxwell, which of course is the main street that neighborhood is named after. And he would just play that all day long. And I don't think anybody noticed he was playing the same song because they would pass by.
This is it. I mean, it's such an interesting, relationship with their audience, isn't it? Because they are literally going past, aren't they? They're not stopping in most cases, are they?
No, they're certainly not. So, usually within earshot of a busker. You might reach into your pocket and see if you had a spare quarter, dime, or nickel, and that would do it. Of course, jumping way ahead of the narrative, today, I see many buskers that have QR codes. And,
yes.
Oh, yeah.
Is that a successful thing? Does that work for buskers nowadays?
I think it's the only way. I mean, who carries money? Who listens to CDs? Everything's digital now. So yeah, I see buskers everywhere I go who have QR codes. Maybe they're selling CDs. They still have their guitar case open, and if you want to throw $1, they're grateful. And I always do, by the way. I try to keep my busking karma at a premium.
Did you ever get a sense of which songs were the most popular over the years that buskers tended to play?
Oh, I don't know. I think that differs. And of course, a lot of buskers play covers. That's certainly their repertoire. In fact, covers probably for various buskers, especially in subways or tubes or certain locations that aren't necessarily known for musical repertoire. Cover songs are probably a great way to go.
Right. Well, I meant covers, and I think most people do play covers, really, don't they?
Well, it seems to be "No Woman, No Cry" is the one that I hear more often than any other on the London tube system. It seems to be. So, just jumping ahead, one of the people, a really interesting figure you cover in the book, because he's not kind of standard folk musician, is Moondog. Is a name that people know a little bit over here. Tell us the Moondog story.
Well, obviously, I didn't get a chance to interview Moondog. He was deceased, and many of the artists that I wrote about, Reverend Gary Davis, Blind Lemon Jefferson, so many others, Blind Arvella Gray, had died before I could interview them. I interviewed Arvella in 1972. But with Moondog, oddly enough, and I'm a Chicago native, not a New Yorker, I never saw him standing around 6th Avenue in New York, where he was famous for standing. However, I did meet him. It was very unlikely. In fact, I couldn't believe it. He had an album out on Columbia Records, so I knew who he was. Again, I'm about maybe 16 by now. And I used to go to a store in Chicago called the Jazz Record Mart, which was owned by Bob Kester, who also had a very famous blues and jazz label called Delmark Records.
Right.
Great and very essential albums by Magic Sam, by Junior Wells, not to mention avant-garde jazz, the AACM, avant-garde players like Anthony Braxton, and from Big Joe Williams to the squawks of avant-garde jazz. Yeah. And I would go there with my allowance money. I don't think I was working yet. My parents would give me $5 a week or what have you, and I'd spend about $1 taking the subway downtown. So there I am. Jazz Record Mart opened, if I'm not mistaken, at about 11 a.m., 11 in the morning, and I'm perennially early even to this day. You throw a party at 6 o'clock, I'll walk in at 5:45. But
and I'll already be there. Don't worry.
We'll be leaving.
So there I was at 10:45 in the morning, a little early, but how do you know how long a subway is going to take to get you 20 miles? And standing there in full Viking regalia.
Because this is he appeared in costume, didn't he?
The strange thing is I've always been a little bit shy on some level. Funny in that for 40 years I was a music publicist, and publicists aren't typically shy. But you would be too if you came up off the subway on Saturday morning and there's Moondog,
a huge man dressed as a Viking.
What is this guy doing? And I can't for the life of me remember whether we spoke or not. And again, he's blind. But we stood there in in front of the Jazz Record Mart until Bob Kester came and opened it at 11 o'clock. And I guess he had been in Chicago. In fact, the photo of him that I use in the book was taken in Chicago, so he must have been there for a reason. But for the life of me, I should have spoken with him. I might have remembered something about the conversation for the chapter. That, like many chapters, had to be sort of cobbled from existing interviews, which, of course, I meticulously attributed and footnoted, and they're in the bibliography.
But you say in the book that he's a symbol, a potent symbol for old New York. What did you mean by that? Was that because he played that mixture of classical music and jazz and Native American music? And what was?
Yeah, he was one of a kind. He was certainly one of a kind. His music was a fusion of classical and jazz, and melodic. I mean, almost in a Gershwin sense. So I don't really know what he was able to do or represent alone, because a lot of what I've heard on record of his is more ensemble oriented. At least the Columbia stuff that I'm most familiar with. But I think he used he's from Kansas, middle of America, farm country, and yet he went to the most urban part of America, Midtown Manhattan, stood outside, and I think eventually got to play inside of Carnegie Hall, the most prestigious venue, of course, in America, and got to record for maybe the most prestigious label, or at least the largest label at the time, Columbia Records. Again, I interviewed a few people who had seen him. I was able to find, he has a great biography written by a gentleman whose last name is Scotto. I highly recommend it. I borrowed a few things from it, and of course, he was a house guest of classical composer Philip Glass.
Yes,
who, put him up for a while in an apartment. That can't have been an easy thing to do, but he did. So I don't know too much more than that, but at least I can say I met him, or at least stood within 2 or 3 feet of him.
Yeah, yeah. What do you make of the kind of the entry of technology into the world of the busker? Because we always used to think of a busker as being, in Britain, the image of a busker was a guy called Don Partridge, who actually had a #1 hit in the middle 60s.
He did. One-man band.
He was basically a one-man band with a bass drum on his back, that he played with his elbows, and he played the guitar, and he had a harmonica holder and so forth. That's what we thought a busker was for years. But nowadays, on the streets of London, buskers are armed with as much technology as a rock band would have had in 1980.
I sort of get turned off when I see backing tracks. I draw the line at backing tracks. I mean, it's all well and good. That's a form of technology, but it kind of locks a busker into a kind of a proscribed song. I mean, you can't really improvise. You can't stop and say thank you. Well, maybe you can, but
no, you
no, you're locked into a beat and a light show, probably. That's right. But you're right. It seems so antithetical to the kind of whole point about busking, which was purely authentic, wasn't it? It was just people on a street corner with acoustic instruments. It just doesn't seem right to us.
I agree. And by the way, there's some discussion in the book about electric versus acoustic. There's some city ordinances. I forget exactly what city has what, but in certain cities, electric is forbidden. It's public space, but you don't want to get too loud and too complicated about it. There are one-person bands. I tried but failed to find many witnesses of Jesse Fuller.
Right, yes, of course.
Who was a band. I mean, he had one foot on his bass pedal,
yes,
and, harmonica rack, and guitar while singing, and there are many one-man bands. I think probably if you were to take a walk through New Orleans, you'd find a few of those. I don't know that that's technology. That's just multitasking. But
that's very interesting, because I do not think you will find an old-fashioned one-man band in London. I haven't seen one for years. Maybe in New Orleans you do. I don't know.
Well, when I see a busker singing to George Benson's "This Masquerade" and there's a backing track, I don't think I consider that busking.
I think in London certainly there's now some kind of vetting process. I'm not sure if you don't have to be auditioned, and then you have to have a license, and you can only play in certain spots. I used to busk in London, a few times in the mid '70s. You could just go anywhere, and there were just certain songs you played, and it was fantastic.
There are cities with ordinances. I for a while I had a Google News alert on busking ordinances, and every day I'd see something from Missoula, Montana, or really odd places and I couldn't keep up after a while, and I didn't think they were all worth putting in the book. But New Orleans, for instance, I spoke to an attorney who happens to be a busking advocate. In fact, she helped vet the chapters on New Orleans. I wanted to make sure I was as accurate as possible, as I do in general. And she has helped really bend the rules so that buskers, can be a little more electric, or some of them use small amps, pig nose amps. I'm not a musician myself. I'm no expert on technology, but you don't want to see Marshall stacks out there. You might want to see a little portable amp, perhaps.
See, my theory is that if you can hear it from more than 50 yards away, that's not busking.
It's not busking.
That's noise pollution.
That's cheating.
You're invading the peace of somebody over there, aren't you? What do you think?
But in a place like New Orleans, where there's a busker every 50 feet, you also need to be considerate of your fellow buskers.
Yes.
If there's only one, who knows? But, a lot of what I put in the book, and again, this came up a lot in New Orleans, was consideration for fellow buskers. And that includes the unwritten law and unwritten rule that you don't, if you happen to notice that a singer-songwriter is playing at a Royal and Toulouse or something, hopefully those streets intersect. I haven't been to New Orleans in a few years. Then you don't stand on that corner. Some people would put props out, or like they do for a parade the next day. They'd put a card chair or a barricade in place as sort of a implicit. This is my squat.
Right.
Squat word that I've learned while doing the research. This is my space. Or if you were a regular, you knew that, and you just found yourself another space. Or you just need to get there at 3 a.m. so that by 8 a.m,
you'd hoovered up all the money.
I spoke to a duo, pardon me, in New Orleans called David and Rosalind, who were telling me that indeed they would get there in the wee hours of the early mornings hours. Just to hold their space. They had a prime space on Royal Street where lots of tourists or lots of people going to work pass by. You need to be considerate of fellow buskers.
They were very interesting because when both of those they had careers, and they were university graduates, and they just spent 50 years busking. Isn't that right?
That's right. And all over the country before they landed on New Orleans.
Yeah. Billy Bragg. Sorry, Dave.
It has. I was wondering if I find myself coming across buskers on YouTube. You just see somebody on a street corner in Madrid or whatever doing some incredibly sophisticated performance. There must be cases. I'm wondering of people sort of becoming famous via YouTube or Instagram busking. Have you come across that?
That's a very good question for volume 2 of the book. I'm very serious about writing one. I think of somebody every day that or come across somebody every day that I missed. And there's certain angles that I think I either gave short shrift to or would like to investigate. I'm writing another book in the meantime that I can't really talk about. It's a biography of a blues artist. But I think, volume 2, I'm keeping notes and I certainly delve into social media as a tool for promoting shows on the street. You can put on Facebook, you can put on most any social media that I'll be on Royal Street at from 10 a.m. till 10 p.m. Come see me. But and you can certainly find a lot of busking on YouTube, and I did a lot of my research that way for artists that I didn't get to see in parts of the country and the world that I don't typically get to go. So that's a very good question. Whether or not the effect of YouTube. Obviously, there's money to be made on YouTube, but you certainly need to get a lot of hits before you see it.
No, sure.
I thought the Billy Bragg chapter was very interesting. He was talking about just how much he learned about performance by starting out as a busker. You said the environment just changes all the time, and you've got to be able to adapt to every single situation of people heckling and just different people and changing people's moods and finding material to fit the bill. You know, I mean, it's true. It must have been an extraordinary learning process for a lot of these people.
Well, Billy was interesting. That was a Zoom interview that I did, and I was very grateful to his management and publicity for putting me through to him and him taking a leap of faith on my project. Hopefully, I didn't let him down. But he was telling me that he applies what he learned in busking to playing a festival. It's like,
that's right.
I don't need a sound check. I'll, give me a few notes. We'll get it right. What do I need a sound check for? He applied a lot of the spontaneity and risk of busking to, and he does to this day, even though he's playing major concerts and theaters, and he's playing festivals.
But he's a kind of classic. He's a classic busker in the sense that Billy is a confident, charming individual. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Even if he stands there, he can draw people to him. You know what I mean? He's not hiding behind the material, is he? You know what I mean?
Right. Well, you sort of need to be a person if you're busking. You need to communicate. You need to make eye contact. There was a lot of I forget exactly who said what, but throughout the book, people talk about eye contact and rapport. Some people. I think Mary Lou Lord was telling me that she was robbed. That the contents of her open guitar case were robbed. Somebody even peed in her guitar case, and like in a tube station in London, if I'm not mistaken. I think that was her. In fact, she had a lot of great stories in a lot of great cities. And by the way, people have busked all over. Madeleine Peyroux is a New York jazz singer who makes some very fine these days for. I think Rounder Concord or whatever label she happens to be on. But she had sort of a bohemian mother, a small b bohemian, who took her from New York to Paris, where she hooked up with, I'm forgetting his name now, but he was a famous American busker who was out there. Man, imagine the odds of a 15-year-old girl raised by a hippie mother, suddenly taken to France and hooks up with a famous busker who knew Bob Dylan. So the book is filled with odd stories. I'm so glad that I got to talk to these people and help get these stories out.
She was interesting about the fact that people can't really sell CDs anymore. I thought that's one of the main revenues of being a busker, was you could sell your own CD, but people don't really buy CDs anymore.
Well, I buy CDs, first of all. I know I'm an anachronism. I know all about Spotify. I do a Spotify account. Obviously, I listen to digital. I listen to SoundCloud all the time. So it's not like I'm any kind of a Luddite. But I really like the ease of putting 6 CDs in the changer and going about my day and letting them recycle and hearing them a second time and thinking, I didn't hear this song the first time. It's a really good song. I didn't catch this the first revolution. So I for one buy them, and as does my wife, even more so. And yeah, you're right. There is less merch. There is less of an emphasis on merch, and I suppose there are T-shirts to be sold and other merch, but that was a big source of income for artists. And a lot of artists create CDs and vinyl just to sell at merch tables.
Yeah, that's right. There's just one great story which we must mention, which I hadn't heard. Maybe you had, Dave. The one about Ramblin Jack Elliott and Mick Jagger.
It's
just a really interesting tale.
I had no idea that story was coming. It took me a long time to get through to Ramblin Jack through his people, and I'm really glad that he did. He's a living legend. I'm really glad that I did. He's a living legend. He gave me a great interview, and indeed, he was playing, and in the audience was a young lad in a British tube named Mick Jagger. And I forget exactly how that story unfolded, but the two met, and
but he was playing on the street, wasn't he? He was playing in a tube station or somewhere, wasn't he?
Yeah, somewhere in Britain though. But he happened to encounter a young Mick Jagger, and somehow ascertained that that's who that was. Mick hadn't started the Rolling Stones quite yet, I don't think, and who knows what kind of an influence seeing somebody like Ramblin Jack, was on Mick Jagger. Obviously, the Rolling Stones weren't a folk band, but.
But Jagger said he went out the next day and bought a guitar on the strength of it.
There you go. There you go. And of course, Mick wasn't known for playing guitar. He was known for singing. But moments like that, I'm sure, helped shape his desire to perform.
Have you ever busked yourself?
I'm not a musician. Plain out and simple.
That doesn't stop most people.
Exactly.
It's not a barrier to entry.
No, I really haven't.
Right.
I'm just a music fan. Oddly enough, I come from music. My mother was a semi-professional violinist. She played in briefly with the Montreal Symphony, but there was always chamber music at home. She and three friends, one who played piano and one who played cello, would come to the house, and in our basement there was an upright piano, and I got to hear chamber music live in the house. But no, I never played it myself. I took lessons, maybe the wrong instruments, violin and clarinet. I did buy myself a Hohner Marine Band harmonica. I thought I could be a little Walter or something.
Yes, always had it in his pocket just in case anybody wants to strike up a tune. I had one of those as well. Absolutely. So
I was never busked.
Who's your personal favorite busker?
Well, everything for me goes back to blind Arvella Gray. But in the present day, let me just choose one of the subjects that I wrote about. Unfortunately, he's deceased. But I lived I lived about 28 years in Chicago, and then I got a record company job offer in Los Angeles, and that became my home for 38 years. And I've been here in the desert for about 2. So one day I'm taking the obligatory walk down Venice Beach boardwalk that you got to take when you first arrive in LA. And I think when I was a young single lad, new in town, I took that walk almost every Saturday afternoon. And the first time I did, I encountered 2 buskers. One of them had just this sonorous voice that reminded me of Otis Redding. I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. And this old black man with white hair and white beard and a guitar. And I later found out that his name was Ted Hawkins, first of all, and what a singer he was. But he seemed to be there for years and years and years, and nobody was noticing him. And I thought, well, here's this obscure guy. Then one day, back when newspapers still ran music news, I read that he was signed to Geffen Records. Ted Hawkins, busker on Venice Boardwalk, who, by the way, had been in hospitals and prisons for various demons and offenses that presumably he overcame. He became a family man and, of course, a very talented singer and guitarist. That he was now discovered.
And made a record with Bill Payne of Little Feat, didn't he? And Jim Keltner and all sorts of people on it. I remember that record. Right.
So an A&R man at Geffen who had signed, I don't think he'd signed Guns N' Roses, but he'd certainly signed Beck and a few other top Geffen acts, named Tony Berg, was told about Ted Hawkins by his best friend, Michael Penn, Sean Penn's brother.
Yeah.
And Michael Penn said, I saw this great singer, and you got to see him, and his name is Ted Hawkins. So one day, Michael Penn and Tony Berg were taking a walk elsewhere near the ocean, 3rd Street Promenade, and happened to see this guy, Ted Hawkins. And, Tony Berg signed him to Geffen. And apparently David Geffen and the label president at the time, Eddie Rosenblatt, had no problem with doing this. They thought it would be a great press angle. So he got to make an album for Geffen. It got a lot of press. I mean, it didn't go gold. It didn't go platinum. It got him on tour. It got him in theaters. I think he always still busked. But he was certainly a favorite of mine when I relocated. In fact, I really wasn't expecting to see street singers in LA. I was too busy moving and starting my record company job. And, wow, they have buskers here. Amazing. And then you can find a lot of them on Venice Beach, which is, very different from Maxwell Street. Maxwell Street being industrial, rundown, urban decay. In fact, it's all torn down and it's fancy condominiums and the university campus now. It no longer really exists as such. But Venice Boardwalk is, the sort of epitome of La La Land. It's the epitome of LA, sunny weather, beaches, surfers, surfboards, bikinis, smoothies, expecting to see anything but the blues and soul being sung there, but sure enough. And I think that same day that I saw Ted Hawkins, I also encountered the guy whose name I didn't catch either, Harry Perry. And Harry Perry, who was interviewed for the book, and boy, he's a pistol. He had a lot of great stories. He really got into talking about his career and the ups and downs. He came from, I believe, Detroit, and ended up with a very signature look, a turban, kind of an Indian turban, roller skates, a long white and an electric guitar with a target that reminds one a little of, say, Eddie Van Halen. And he would roller skate. I think I even saw him fall once, but he got right back up after checking his guitar to make sure that wasn't broken. Unfortunately, it wasn't.
You didn't ever catch him on his way to work, did you? I always like to think this. Buskers, they have to get there, you know what I mean? So you sit in the tube or what? There's a guy across the carriage. He's got a guitar.
I never saw the commute. If we lived nearby in Santa Monica, I never saw him roller skating down 4th and Main.
He's got a Viking outfit and some roller skates.
Probably. You know, one of the most unusual buskers. Speaking of bicycles and speaking of commuting, and again, somebody who's deceased, so I didn't get to talk to him, but I did find a few eyewitnesses and several things written about him. In San Antonio, Texas, was a guy named Bongo Joe. Bongo Joe was a steel drum player. Actually, he played like oil drums, not even steel drums, but that would imply calypso music, and that's actually an instrument. No, these were regular steel oil drums from the oil capital of America, Texas. And Bongo Joe, whose real name was George Coleman, and ended up making some recordings for the Arhoolie label, famous for blues, folk, Nortino music. Chris Strachwitz, may he rest in peace, an amazing visionary in finding people like Bongo Joe. So Bongo Joe he had a moped, and somehow or other, he would drive his steel drums and his drum
on a moped
to work by the I think it's called the Riverwalk. I'm not very familiar with San Antonio, but he would play this place I believe called the Riverwalk there, and apparently the sight of him commuting with this moped was a sight.
But this is what we want. Surely we're missing people on mopeds with steel drums. We don't want people with credit card readers and backing track of Coldplay song.
I don't think there were barcodes when you saw Bongo Joe playing.
I think we can safely say that the glory days of busking must be behind us.
Well, it's true. It's true. I'm happy to have seen Arvella Gray on Maxwell Street when I did. I don't think I could have written this book if I had just come to Buskers in the 70s. No, I actually did come to it in the 70s, but if I'd come to it in the 80s or 90s, I don't think I could have written this book. I mean, meeting Moondog, even just standing next to him.
That's fantastic.
Open. I didn't see him play, but I just basking in the presence of Moondog, in his Viking outfit, seeing blind Arvella Gray play Maxwell Street and subway stations in Chicago, going to and seeing Mary Lou Lord, might I add. I went to 30 South by Southwest, so I was in the music business, and I was very into Austin, and I didn't catch the very first South by Southwest, but I catch the second through the I think the must have been the 31st, because I went to 30 of them before Austin was starting to get too big and the festival was starting to get too big and too unfocused. It became an interactive festival and a film festival. But I'm a music guy. Anyway,
they're terrific stories, and
there are a lot more. I used to see Mary Lou Lord playing. She couldn't get an official showcase, so she would play out on 6th Street over at the corner of 6th and Brazos, a very key pedestrian location. And for years she played until finally she got offered an official showcase.
There you go.
They're good stories. And there's the brilliant description of the story of Elvis Costello playing outside the CBS convention in 1977, which I remember, yeah. And also lovely, great stuff about Wild Man Fischer too. It's a brilliant book. Yeah. Thanks so much for talking to us, Carrie.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
Good luck with it, and we'll see you again soon.